Well, it is my great pleasure to share the stage this morning with Stephen Elop, who, like Birke said, has had a truly global career. He used to be my boss, and I think we're all excited to hear from Stephen. You know, he was born and raised in Canada, so there are a lot of good hockey conversations already.
Tonight, Seattle Kraken.
Yes. And then, you know, has worked in many countries, in multiple locations here in the US, in exciting places like Australia, but then, of course, Finland. And we're just really excited to have you here and share some of your learnings with us today. Welcome.
Thank you.
And then could you just start with your own words, talk a little bit about your career?
Happy to. So back in the day, I worked at a company called Macromedia. And we built tools for people who were just learning to build what we now know as web pages and web applications, Dreamweaver, Macromedia, Flash, the very early days of the contemporary internet. And of course, I lived through the bursting of the internet bubble and that great moment of change. Another moment of technology disruption that I somewhat enjoyed at the time is I was a president at Microsoft, which is what brought me first here to Seattle. And I was responsible for the Office division, so Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and so forth. And during that time, it was the very first time we made available web-based versions of Microsoft Office. You could go on the web and actually use Microsoft Word. It was very controversial at the time, but if you fast forward to today, that whole advent of cloud computing has led to what we now know as Microsoft 365, Azure, cloud computing. It began with the decision to let people use productivity tools on the internet. Now, of course, Nokia represented a huge moment of technology disruption. The mobile industry had been around for some time, but there was a huge change going on. The introduction of the iPhone, the Android open source operating system, new form factors, and those types of things. It was a moment of great disruption that we'll talk about more in a second. And today I find myself involved in companies that are focused on applying machine learning and artificial intelligence to software development processes and a variety of other things. So for any of you watching the technology news and think about things like ChatGPT and everything else that's going on, once again, we're at a pivotal moment, and I'm enjoying participating in that aspect of technology.
So one of the things I think, you know, because I've learned a lot from you. And one of the things I distinctly remember when you first joined Nokia was you started to talk about your leadership principles. And to me, you know, I've shamelessly copied them because I think they are so universal and great that I have not found better. And I think the audience would really enjoy if you could share what those are.
Sure. So these are leadership principles I'm sure I stole from others and assembled and continue to evolve. But there are 5 of them in my mind. The first is to be absolutely open, honest, direct, and transparent in your communications, particularly with your employees, with your board. You tell the truth, you tell people the way it really is, you share the good news and the bad news. You absolutely do that. The second is to encourage everyone to vigorously engage in the debate. When you're having a tough moment, when you have to make a policy change or a technology decision or a strategy decision, get everyone involved in the debate and encourage that. Everyone has to participate. But at the same time, once a decision is made, you must support the outcome of that decision and stand behind it. You can't decide to work against it or be passive aggressive or say, I don't know what management was thinking. You're part of management. You've got to deal with that. The third is to always assume the best of intentions with people. So when you see something going on, when someone proposes a different direction or is heading in a different direction or doing something that maybe makes you wonder a little bit, start off with the assumption that they're doing it with the best of intentions and trying to help. And it removes so much animosity and so much upset from an organization to operate that way. Now, that being said, not everyone always operates with the best of intentions, so you have to deal with that as well, but start from that assumption of goodwill. The fourth is to recognize where the competition is, and most specifically, externally, compete vigorously. The competition is out there, but internally, particularly in a large organization, you must partner across the organization. You must build alliances across the organization so that you can get the best outcome. Too often, particularly in large organizations, you get the individual divisions competing with each other, forgetting that the competition is out there. And then the fifth principle is for everyone in the company, and certainly every member of management, to model these behaviors both inside the company and outside, to talk about them, to share them, to proselytize those behaviors. And when you see someone not following those behaviors, to call them out on it in the moment. Say, hold on, you're not operating with transparency. Let's be more transparent, or whatever the case may be. So those are the 5 principles, and yes, I find myself continuing to take advantage of them.
Yes. How would you say they worked in a Nordic or in a Finnish context?
So in the Nordic context, specifically in Finland, I think it's safe to say when we think about the Finnish culture, and we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, the element of directness is a key part of the culture. People want directness. And so with me arriving and being a relatively direct person, I was able to use that somewhat to my advantage, and it worked, I think, very well. In my first 90 days within Nokia, I sent out an email to all of the employees, and that was tens of thousands of people, and asked them to tell me what was working, what was not working, and what are you afraid I might miss in my first 90 days? And I got thousands of responses.
I know you'd be up 4 a.m. answering them.
I responded to them, but I also synthesized them, brought them together. And what you quickly learn, and I think this is a universal truth, is the employees of an organization, particularly when there are tough times, they know what the problems are. They're living them every day. They know long before management has figured anything out. Those people know what the problems are, and quite often they have the solutions as well. So you have to listen. So I think it's safe to say I developed quite a reputation for being open and transparent on these issues, because I took all of that information, synthesized it into a summary of our key problems, and stood up in front of tens of thousands of employees and shared exactly what everyone had told me. And I put it in their words and played it back to them, and all the heads are nodding. The result of that is we saw the engagement of employees, the participation in solving the problems absolutely soar, absolutely grow from that point. And so that was something that was really encouraging, and therefore from a cultural perspective and everything, it worked. But it also led to something else which was helpful. That level of directness, the leadership principles and so forth, led us to identify 3 key behaviors that we thought were important to the future of the company. The first of those was urgency. We were in a situation where I think roughly 80% of the value of the company had been lost in the preceding 3 years before I arrived. And it was because of all of the disruption and everything going on. We had a Symbian operating system that was well past its best before date. We had a new effort that was not going well. We were blind to the United States. We'd lost our position in the United States. And as a result, we're not as sensitized as we perhaps could have been to the rise of iPhone and Android. And as Clay Christensen would describe innovator's dilemma, we were the kings on the decline, and we were being disrupted from below by Android, and we were being disrupted from on high by the iPhone. So urgency, and we have to make decisions quickly, we have to move quickly, and rallying the troops to do that was an important behavior. The second important behavior was accountability. In a large organization, you can get a diffuse sense of who's accountable for anything. And so we had to become very clear on who was accountable for what things, who had decision rights, also we could move quickly. And then the third critical behavior we identified was, and this was a bit of a management code word, I acknowledge that it wasn't entirely transparent, but the word we used was empathy. We had to show more empathy. And it's a code word because having been king and the leaders for so long, we were not particularly humble at that point. And our customers were feeling that, employees were feeling that, and so we had to inject a fresh sense of humility into the organization and say, look, we're in trouble, we have problems, we are being disrupted, we have to listen to our customers, we have to work differently, and so forth. And all of those things led to a situation where we had Nokia moving together in a new, albeit very difficult direction, but we were able to accomplish some things.
And to be a little bit self-critical, that urgency, I think, was so important because the Nordics have this consensus culture where it's important to kind of ensure alignment, but it can be slow at times.
One of the things that actually developed as a technique, because it's a good point, leading to a consensus, which definitionally means everybody agrees, can be very difficult. And it is an important part of certainly the Finnish culture. One of the things that we developed there was a consensus process, which was a little bit different. It meant I would encourage, for example, the leadership team, every single person to participate in all aspects of the decision making. So if we needed to have 37 meetings to figure something out difficult, everyone had to be there for every part of it. We made sure every person had a voice, but in the end, when a decision was made, it was seldom a complete consensus, but everyone in the room had been a part of it, felt they had been heard, and therefore could support it. And that was the next best thing.
Right. Well, what surprised you about the Finns? I mean, those of you who follow music, and this is the Eurovision Song Contest week, I mean, that Finnish song is pretty surprising, and it's getting kind of global news. So you've not seen it, go find it on YouTube. And the Sweden is the #1 favorite, so it's another good Finland-Sweden rivalry. But other than that, you became very ingrained in the Finnish culture. What surprised you about the Finns?
So, whether it's the song or many other things, there are a number of characteristics of the Finnish culture which are generalized or stereotyped, and it could be the stoic nature, the self-reliance, the ingenuity, the love of nature. It could be the support for broad social welfare and taking care of all people, and there's a number of things that greatly characterize the Finnish people. And of course, we all read how happy the Finnish people are, although I don't have as clear a recollection of that at the time when I was there. But nonetheless, you see some of these patterns. And I think the thing that should not have surprised me, but that I learned from my time in Finland, and because it was such a different culture from where I had been before, is the extent to which all of us are the outcome of our origin stories in our culture. That, for example, the people of Finland are very much a product of the history of the country and the nature of the country going back centuries, and you can see it as you come to understand it. So, for example, Finland, first of all, as we all know, you all know better than I do, is a very young country. It's just over 100 years old in its modern form. It's just finding itself relative to many other countries. It's a relatively small country. Roughly 5.5 million people, which means if you drive around the Puget Sound area and maybe just a little bit on the other side of the Cascade Mountains, it's that many people. It's really, really small and young and so forth. And it's been invaded and occupied a few times from the west, from the east, multiple times, and had to fight back and push back and find itself. And so what I came to appreciate about the Finnish culture is here's a relatively small number of people who have faced great adversity over the years to define themselves and emerge from this. And so is it any surprise that a level of grit and determination and collectivism, very small number of people having to work together to push back, up to the east and the west and all of that, is it any surprise that this concept of sisu, that we all know so well, but actually is so deeply embedded in the culture, is an important part of this? And I'll tell you, there was one moment where it really struck me. I had the good fortune of spending time with the then head of the Finnish Defense Forces, and we were talking about civil defense and how it works in Finland. And unlike here in the United States, in times of national emergency, what you see in Finland, be it a war or pandemic or whatever, is every institution comes together, works together collectively, all the way through the population if necessary. And whether it's the police, the fire, civil defense forces, the armed forces, everyone comes together and works because there's not enough different groups or people. You all actually have to work together. And the efficiency that comes from that, combined with the sisu to get it done, means that Finland, it just punches above its weight. It's amazing. And so we'll come back to that in a moment because I think it's one of the, I guess it didn't surprise me because you can read about it, but as you come to understand it and from where it came, it really tells you a lot.
Well, let's move on then to kind of the theme of the summit here, which is sustainability. So given, what you experienced and observed, what do you think, how do you see sustainability kind of showing up in the Nordics?
Well, first of all, by any measure, and that's part of what you're celebrating and investigating and talking about here in the summit, the Nordic countries are clearly the world leaders in sustainability. There's just no question when you look at any of the metrics and the policies that are in place, the progress that's been made over many years, the leadership is there. And I think it's a recognition, or perhaps a result of the recognition, that sustainability is this huge, complex, multifaceted challenge. And it's just so hard to even think about where do you begin. And so, I turn to someone like Desmond Tutu, who I think was the first person who said that if you want to eat an elephant, you have to do it one bite at a time. It's the only way to do it. And if you think about sustainability, you have to take one bite at the elephant, or maybe have a lot of people taking one bite at the elephant all together in a coordinated, efficient way to make incremental progress on many fronts over time. You need, and I think this is sort of the theme of this summit, you need a sustainable, ongoing approach to sustainability. You need government, you need industry, research, education, all working together in a collaborative, coordinated way across multiple fronts to really make that progress. You need grit and determination. And so when you think about what we were talking about in terms of certainly the Finnish culture and certainly the Nordics more broadly, that just determination to say, we're going to go and do this. You need the support of the population as well. You need that sense of, we need to do this for the well-being of everybody, because everyone's going to benefit. That is more naturally something you see in Finland. So when I think about the Nordics, I see all sorts of natural reasons why such great progress has been made and will continue to be made.
And it's of course easier when you are in a small country that is more homogeneous than, let's say, North America or United States. But nevertheless, what do you think the U.S. could learn from the Nordics when it comes to sustainability?
So let's start with, to answer that, let's start with the advantages a country like Finland has. It is less politically polarized than the United States. There's challenges in every country, but it's less politically polarized. It's less carbon dependent because of natural resources, hydroelectric power, and things like that. It has the ability to have government and corporations and so forth work more collaboratively together for common purpose than you see in other countries. So you see all of these advantages that it has. But if you believe that a big part of the advantage is the collectivism, the sisu, the ability to come together, if that is one of the core things at the heart of what has made Finland and perhaps the Nordics as successful as it has been, and then you look at the United States and say, what can they learn? At the highest level, the short answer is very little, very little. And the reason for that, again, it goes back to that point about cultural roots and the origin story of various countries. The United States and Finland, their origin story is fundamentally different. One does not use the word collectivism and socialism in the United States. You use the word individualism. That's where it began. If you go right to the founding of the country, or even in the years before that, it began with that concept of individualism and don't you tell me, don't tread on me, don't tell me what I can and can't do. So it's a very different culture. And if you just take, as another example, healthcare. There is no way on earth that the people of Finland would be happy if we airlifted the American healthcare system and dropped it on Finland. Right? Which is why would we believe, therefore, that the Finnish healthcare system could be airlifted or transposed into the United States and land successfully? It just simply could not. Now, we each have our opinion as to which is a better healthcare system, and I am Canadian, remember that. So we definitely have different points of view. And so what you have to look at in a situation like the United States and that foundation of individualism, along with many other factors, and obviously hundreds of years of success in its own right, is so how do you solve problems like this at the highest level in the United States? Well, the biggest issues you hope can be solved nationally. You hope the federal government and people working together can come together and solve some of the biggest problems. And sometimes that happens under certain circumstances. Right now, it's not happening as much as I think many people would like to see it happen. So what happens in the United States, because of its size, and we got lots of governments to go around, is it drops down to the state level, and the states begin to make decisions. So right now, actually, if you look at the last 2 or 3 decades, the state of California has consistently set emission standards to improve sustainability in the state of California that have naturally become the standards for most of the United States because of the economics of how you make cars and things like that. But that state by itself set what has essentially become a national standard, and now the nation's going beyond that. So that's a good example. Now, equally, there are bad examples. It's not all states move in what I would consider to be the right direction. The state of Texas, just this week, is pursuing legislation in an effort to slow down renewable energy in the state of Texas. Solar and wind, they're trying to slow down the development of that industry in favor of natural gas. So they're working on that side of it. So some states will push in one direction, some states will push in another. But if you look at the arc of history, and if you think about what's the right side of history, we all know what the right side of history will be, and the United States tends to find its way there, maybe eventually. But there's more governments than that. There's cities, there's counties, there's villages, all of these types of things. Can we imagine the city of Seattle, for example, someday being like Oslo and being heavily electrified with electric vehicles, given the politics, the money, everything that goes on in the city of Seattle and the surrounding area? Absolutely yes. Come back in 5 years. Come back every year, please. But come back in 5 years, and it will likely be somewhere catching up to Oslo. So at the highest level, what can the United States learn from Finland? Very little, because of cultural differences. However, at the tactical level, in the details, there's so much to be learned. There was just fortuitous, and I don't know if the organizing committee planted this article in the New York Times on Tuesday of this week, but it was a national newspaper. Everyone read about Oslo and the electric vehicle situation in Oslo. And I get my gas at a company in Bellevue, just across the lake, called Circle K. That's where I get the gas for my automobile. And Circle K was featured in this article about Oslo, about what the future of gas stations looks like in Oslo. And there's a hint, there's no gas at the gas station. There is electric recharging stations, there's certainly potato chips and Coke Zero and everything else you need at a gas station, but they are researching and learning what will work in the future. Can the United States learn from that? Well, I guarantee you that that's the whole idea, and we will learn from that. But then on the other side, one of those unintended consequences, the air quality in Oslo has improved dramatically because nitrous oxide and other chemicals have been taken out. Asthma rates have plummeted, so we all have that certainly here in Seattle to look forward to. But now there's more microparticles of rubber in the air. Who would have thought? It's because of the extra weight of the electric automobiles on the roads, churning up more rubber, using tires faster. And so now we have another problem that science will, and engineers will go and solve. We'll figure it out, but it's a much better place. So can we learn at the tactical level? Yes. So at the end of the day, the arc of history is clear. We know where we're going with sustainability and what must happen. It will happen. We'll get there in different cultures, in different ways, but we can learn a lot from each other.
And to drive effective change, you need to understand the cultural context in which you operate.
Absolutely. They're very different.
Yes. Well, thank you, Stephen. It was wonderful to have you here today and share your insights and learnings. And I'm really proud to be calling you my mentor, and I appreciate your support for the museum. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you.